Welcome to video 4 from chapter 1, where we will look at the learning question, how can you be a smart consumer of information about development? There's only 2 slides in this final video, so it'll be a little bit shorter. First of all, becoming a smart consumer of information it's essential that you know your sources. You want knowledgeable and objective sources, um, and you want convergence from multiple sources. Don't just believe the first website that you read or the first article that you read. Seek out multiple sources and look for, what ideas are similar in the different sources. Um, it, when you do research on online research and do searches for information, keep in mind that there are a lot of very good websites out there, but there's a lot of poor and misinformed websites as well. So, you would want to trust a website like um, I don't know, the American Psychological Association, for instance, has a very good website. You're much more likely to trust that website than John's website of psychological facts. When you don't even know who John is. So pay attention to the websites that you end up on when searching out information. Do they seem credible? Do they have, the support of a large organization behind them? And when you read articles that, you know, the gold standard is really to try to get information from peer-reviewed journal articles. The reason that we trust them is that the peer review process is a very intensive process. Before an article gets published in a peer-reviewed journal, there are other experts in the field that read the article and have to approve it. They cannot ask the author to make changes for things that aren't clear or for things that might be somehow wrong or misstated. And so it's actually a lengthy process to get an article published in a peer-reviewed journal. And so when it finally does get published and it's been okayed by other experts, you can really trust that article to be a legitimate source. Right. Next, you want to become a critical thinker. Well, this is a good goal for anyone. In order to become a critical thinker, you need to seek out divergent opinions from credible sources on any topics that interest you. And the key here is divergent opinions. I will admit that sometimes it's nice to read articles or to watch videos from people that completely agree with you and have the same opinion as you. It's kind of like wrapping yourself in a warm blanket to read or watch things that completely align with your viewpoints. However, that's not the way to become a critical thinker. You really need to try to, if there's opposing viewpoints, you need to try to understand the opposing viewpoints and to read or watch things that go against what you believe and to try to understand them. Our society could certainly benefit if more people did this in certain areas where we have divergent opinions. But just to give you an example, I'm not in favor of physical punishment for children, but I've also read some very convincing arguments about when and why it might be needed in certain instances. And so I can't just, go with my personal experience and because, I didn't raise my daughter growing up in poverty, for instance. I always had enough food for him, but I wasn't working 2 jobs in order to make ends meet. So my situation doesn't represent everyone else's situation. And so it's always good to keep an open mind and try to understand, well, why would somebody, have an opposing viewpoint? When might it be necessary? What do other experts that disagree with me have to have to say about it. And you can still hold on to one viewpoint, but it's very important to understand opposing viewpoints and why they exist. And that's what makes a person a real critical thinker, is it they, if they're liberal minded, they still watch Fox News and try to understand it. If they're more conservative minded, they don't shy away from an article just because it comes from the New York Times. Or, I mean, like, it's about trying to reach across divisions and understand that we're, people with opposing views are often more similar than it initially seems. All right, you need to also guard against generalizations. So don't generalize from a single example, and don't reject research results just because your individual experiences don't agree to the research findings. So just to go back to the idea of spanking, when I talk about it in class sometimes, and I say that, I believe that there are better ways than using physical punishment while raising a child. I mean, I always hear at some point, well, I was spanked growing up and I turned out okay. And that's a very, very common phrase that comes about. And there's two problems with that. First of all, we all think we turned out okay, because we don't really have a comparison. I mean, I always like to say, well, yeah, you turned out okay, but think of how great you might have been in better circumstances. So I mean, like, I mean, I like to think I turned out okay, but you know what? There was a lot of ways I could have turned out better, under different circumstances. I mean, I certainly grew up with physical punishment, but it's so your individual experience doesn't apply to the millions of others necessarily. And this is where we try to separate out, doing research with large numbers of people and looking for the typical or average kind of findings, but understanding once again that that there are individual differences. I talked about this in an earlier video. Some people don't fit the pattern. They have, you know, there are certainly cases where physical punishment is very much warranted. It depends on each individual situation, but so it's not an all or none. In many issues in developmental psychology and in child development, there's often, there's often what the average or typical results are, but understanding once again that it doesn't fit for everyone. And so when your experience is different and doesn't fit something presented in the research, it does not discount the research. It just means that perhaps you're one of the exceptions or one of the ones with individual differences. And we expect that there's always going to be people that don't fit a typical pattern. So we need to guard against generalizations. And finally, and there's only one slide. I thought there was two, but there's only one actually. Okay, avoiding perceptual bias. And perceptual bias refers to the tendency to see and understand something in the way you expect it to be. And this kind of relates to when I talk about becoming a critical thinker. I mean, when you have perceptual bias, you see things the way you kind of want to see them. And just think about something like rooting for a sports team. So I don't know, maybe you watched some football this last weekend, or you watch some other sports at times, and if you ever, if there's ever like a play that's in dispute, I mean, like, think about how you see that play. It probably always favors the way you want it to be. So, if there was a foul against your team, you would see it as a foul. And somebody rooting for the other team would be like, that's not a foul. And it's not like either person's lying. They're actually seeing it differently. They're perceiving the event differently, even though they watch both, two people can watch the exact same, replay and not agree on what actually happened, because our actual perceptual experience is affected by what we want and expect to happen. And so it actually affects how we perceive any event. So it is very difficult to avoid perceptual bias. It actually takes practice to try to see things differently than how you expect them to be or how you want them to be. And it, it kind of takes pushing aside your personal opinions or beliefs or desires in order to become more and more objective. Um, anyways, and then that's part of becoming a critical thinker as well, is to get rid of your perceptual bias and to try to understand what things that you may not initially believe or want to be true. Anyways, that is it for chapter 1. Watch more for more videos for chapter 2 coming soon.